Welcome to the God is Not an Asshole podcast. If you are one of the many people done with religious dogmatism, hang on. You might sense transcendence, but your church or other faith community never seem to get off the ground. You realize that honoring your conscience means more than fitting in and keeping hard-to-explain rules? Hang on. You could probably think of the goodness in your tradition, and you tried your best to save that baby, but there's so much bathwater. Join your hosts, David Norman Moore Jr. in California and Carrie Connolly in New Jersey, who are collaborating to bring on guests who have found life on the other side of fundamentalism. Guests with stories of how they have liberated themselves from beliefs that divide us from each other. None of our guests' narratives are identical, but we hope you'll find something in common with each of them. We invite you to experience our common bond as we all inspire even more of us to embrace the true self.
Well, I am so incredibly excited to introduce this particular guest for so many reasons. Not only is she a complete badass, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how she's a complete badass, but she's also one of my absolute besties. And she is a human being that has borne witness to my life in so many ways, and I to hers. She has talked me off of many a ledge. She has talked me through many trauma responses. Our text threads are epic. And this is a human being that I love deeply, deeply. And so Cassidy Hall is, and also I'm just so excited that I get to brag about her a little bit because I know she hates when I do this, but as friends, right, we get to uplift and brag about each other in ways that we might not do for ourselves. And so I'm thrilled to be able to tell you a little bit about her. So she is an award-winning documentary filmmaker. She is a scholar and an expert on the mystic Thomas Merton. She is a new author. She has an amazing book coming out called Contemplation. She has multiple master's degrees in both, I think, theology and counseling. And she is a colleague and in my cohort as we struggle through our doctorate program. Whose idea was that, Cassidy? I don't know.
I don't know.
We'll blame Anne right
Scott.
now. Anne and Scott. So I am just absolutely thrilled to introduce you to the absolutely amazing Cassidy Hall. So hi, Cass. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Cassidy,
thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, and thanks for being Carrie's bestie. That's such a big part of life and living. So I want to honor that. And I don't know which way we're going to go today, but I just when I heard the words Thomas Merton, I want to ask you, how did he really die?
Oh, you're into the CIA conspiracy, aren't you?
Yeah.
So that's something I love talking about with folks. When I go to the International Thomas Merton Society conference every 2 years. And of course, that topic comes up every year. Sometimes people do a presentation on it and everything. So I love talking conspiracy theories. I'm actually going tonight to Louisville to the Thomas Merton Center for a Black History Month lecture that they do every year. So I'm actually going there to that and then going to do some research on some of the letters that Thomas Merton wrote with LGBTQIA folks. So I'm going to kind of do some research on some of that stuff.
So where do you land on the whole conspiracy?
There are just so many coincidences. I just wonder about, JFK, his connection to Merton, and then JFK is planning on withdrawing troops from Vietnam, and then suddenly he's dead.
Maybe we should actually explain for people who are listening who don't know who Thomas Merton is. Maybe, Cass, you can explain who Thomas Merton is a little bit.
Yes, please. I thought of that too. Yes.
And
sure.
the conspiracy.
I'm a little overexcited about that. So.
No, it's all good. It's all good. It's a topic I can get really going on. Thomas Merton was a Trappist monk, which is a order of monks that's known to be one of the more quote unquote strict groups of monks, though they do not take a vow of silence. That is often misunderstood. They take 3 vows: one, a vow of stability, a vow of conversion of manners, and a vow of obedience. The conversion of manners is the idea of kind of like yielding to this new community that you've chosen to become a part of. And Thomas Merton was born in 1915, but he entered the monastery, I don't know what year. I'm going to screw that up, so I'm not going to go there, but he died in 1968. And he's a prolific author who wrote this spiritual autobiography called The 7-Story Mountain, which is pretty well known, especially in Catholic circles. But towards the end of his life, he really started pursuing different types of monastic communities and Zen meditation. And he was, he corresponded with a lot of interfaith folks, and including like Rachel Carson, who, wrote Silent Spring about ecological justice. And he did write a letter to James Baldwin that apparently never made it to him. So he died in 1968, and he died while he was at a conference in Thailand about Eastern and Western monasticism. So it was about Buddhist monasticism and basically Catholic monasticism. And I think he was giving a talk on was it Marxism maybe or something? He was giving a really interesting talk on something. And then, went to his room after the talk, and they say he took a bath and touched a fan and died by electrocution. So
that feels weird.
So the kids, but I mean, this is also, the 1960s. So it's not like electric things are super stable. We're also in Thailand. I don't know, at a hotel, presumably. I don't know.
But he's also not 5 years old.
He's also not 5 years old. He's also incredibly outspoken about the Vietnam War, as you mentioned. He's also incredibly outspoken about nuclear weapons. He's also just very bold and clear about his stance on things like racism. In response to letter from a Birmingham jail, Thomas Merton wrote Letters to a White Liberal, which was kind of addressing the white liberal and I would say religious issues related to racism. So,
and it's fair to say that, he was bold and he was probably quite influential in a very large voting base, right? So that could potentially create a reason why, it does kind of sound like the perfect hit,
I know. There's a book out there called, I think, The Martyrdom of Thomas Merton or something like that, which kind of talks about these ideas, possibilities, conspiracies about his death. So, I don't know where I land. I don't know where I land. The jury is still out because I don't think we'll ever officially know, but I love getting more information about it. There's a story about a monk who was at the conference who heard something either below his room or above his room and didn't go investigate it right away, went to the pool and then came back or something. So I love getting new stories like that, but
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about you now, my friends. So
you don't want to talk about Thomas Merton the whole time?
I know you could talk about Thomas Merton, but the thing is it's the presence of now, right? The moment is now. And you have a beautiful book coming out called Queering Contemplation. And I would love
Queering Contemplation.
Yes, Queering Contemplation. So I would love for you to talk I have a quote that I've pulled out that I want to talk with you about, because I have the pleasure of knowing and knowing you through the process of writing the book and knowing your thoughts and what you kind of think about it. But I would love to hear you describe the book. What's the book about? What does it mean to you?
Yeah. So one of the things I think it's really important as a premise to discussing the book is discussing what I mean when I say queer. And so for me, queer isn't just related to my sexuality. It is also the way I tilt my head to look at the world. And one of the things that I've found in my experience of being queer in the world is that my queerness has a lot of similarities to my contemplative life. Both are innately odd and strange. For instance, contemplative life invites us into things like silent prayer or into, solitude and sacred pauses and things like this. And I found that when I kind of looked at them together, queerness and contemplative life, I found these just have far more similarities than differences. And recognizing that union in my life helped me to kind of see how they enliven one another. How contemplative life, maybe we could say, makes me more queer, or how my queerness makes me more of a contemplative. And the book is a compilation of personal stories, spiritual teaching, and just kind of my own story and my own thoughts on those concepts.
And some of your influences have been womanist theologians. And I forgot to mention that in your intro, you're also the host of a number of podcasts. One is Encountering Silence, right? Is that right? And then, which is also the name of one of your films. And then, I'm sorry, I had it in my head before we got on.
It's kind of like tongue twisters when you list them all. Encountering Silence, Contemplating Now, and Queer and Contemplation.
Okay. And so Contemplating Now was womanists, right?
Primarily, it focuses on the wisdom of Black women and one non-binary Black person, and the ways in which their wisdom in the realm of contemplation and mysticism points to mystical expression in present day and contemplative action in present day. So kind of the intersection of contemplation and social justice, largely.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to pull out from the book, because I feel like this has kind of been at the crux of a lot of the conversations that you and I have had offline personally, and I feel like it's kind of the crux of this book. Although maybe not. I think you get to decide what the crux of the book is rather than I do. But this hit home for me. So in the chapter, it's about the chapter about self on page 98, you say, a desire to define or know does not give me permission to ask questions simply to satisfy my own curiosity. Rather, the desire to name, define, or identify is a different invitation altogether. It's an invitation for me to examine and hold open-handed my own definition, my own name, and my own identity over and over again. While no one owes anyone else answers to such questions ever, I believe we can subvert institutions like patriarchy and heteronormativity by recognizing that we ourselves never fully know the answers. We are ever evolving, ever becoming, and ever unfolding. Identity is an ever-moving target, and any conviction that the self is singular or fixed is limiting and often even harmful. Instead, we can hold what we think we know about ourselves with open hands. We can allow ourselves to become, which offers us room to breathe and blossom. Maybe when sexuality and gender forego binary expectations, they are freer to be alive within us. And contemplative life, or contemplative life, beckons us to the same, encouraging us to loosen our grip on ourselves, those around us, and the divine.
Ooh, I should take my own advice.
I know, right?
It sounds what you just read, Carrie, of Cassidy's words, in short, said to me, it is unhealthy and improper to objectify anyone, anything, or ourselves. And I will just add to that. I think that generally speaking, people who are a third my age do a much better job of that. They've been conditioned and in a way that, you know what I'm saying, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Though I wonder if it feels like they've been conditioned because of the people that we hang out with, and if all of the younger generations are really being conditioned to away from the binary and toward this holding of all things of our own becoming, right? I have started saying myself, I reserve the right to my own becoming, right? That's I get to become whoever it is that I want to become. So I would love, Cassidy, can you talk a little bit more about that whole question of identity and holding it loosely?
Yeah. I think I want to begin by going back to your note on womanist scholars, because one of the first books I read in the realm of queer theology was a book titled Our Lives Matter, A Queer Womanist Theology. And that is by the Reverend Dr. Pamela Lightsey. And in that book, she says very simply and unequivocally that she says, to say that I am queer, just to say that I am queer, right? She says, is my active engagement against heteronormativity.
Mm.
And I love that because it's like, look at what we can do when we focus on ourselves. And I think part of the excerpt that you read is about the way in which we just always want to like know and understand each other. And ultimately, what I experience ourselves doing so much is projecting our own discomfort on each other. Because when we don't understand something and we can't name something or understand something clearly, we get disoriented. And we live in a society that expects us to be able to know and name things. And contemplative life is, Christianity's Zen in the ways that it reminds us that, hey, truth lives in paradox. Truth lives in the places where we can't understand or name, or it's the place where we find ourselves in awe. It's the place where we are so loosed by our disorientation, knowing and understanding that we have to go into this place of awe. We have to go to that place of wonder. It's a place of surrender.
So one of the things that I'm curious about and wondering is this idea of knowing, right? And on the one hand, like based on what you're saying and based on the excerpt that I just read, and this is something that I agree with, this almost like insistence on knowing and being able to name and identify is born out of a sense of almost out of a sense of ownership and entitlement and a desire to control, which I think ultimately comes out of a desire or a fear, a sense of fear, right? And also, I don't think that when you're talking about that, I don't think you're also talking about that deep embodied knowing that each of us have of ourselves, right? Like I'm assuming, I'm not going to claim this as true, but I think that there might be sometimes about ourselves that we wonder, but I think always deep within us, there is a deep knowing about who we are or what is true for us. And I think the wrestling comes with society's norms and mores that tell us that what we are isn't good enough.
Absolutely. Yeah. And do I hear you correctly? Like you're kind of talking about that intuitive knowing or that bodily intuitive knowing.
Right. Which I don't think is what you're talking about in this particular context. You're talking about, I want to know who you are, Cassidy. I demand to tell me, define yourself for me in a way.
Right. Like if someone, comes up to me and says, so are you gay? Are you a lesbian? Are you, and I define myself as queer, and that's only up to me. Like I don't have to tell you that. Doesn't matter. I also think I'm saying a multitude of things in that, because I think I'm also saying like, okay, if my vocation is I am a potter and that is my job and that's what I do. But if I hold on to that so tightly, there's no room for me to become a writer, for me to become something else, right? I mean, if I hold on to that identity so tightly, there's no spaciousness for me to tap into that bodily knowing, for me to tap into that intuitive knowing in order to see if there's more evolution for my life, in order to see if there's more becoming for my life. And so I think, there's just like a multitude of layers in that, isn't there?
Yeah.
So Cassidy, what if your response is something like, I'm an artist?
Yeah. Right.
I mean, that you have the space to create and recreate even who you are, and I mean, it's so non-restrictive. That's all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're making me think about a conversation I had with my friend Deb the other day. And she basically was like, I don't know why, but all of this time, she goes, I'm just coming to the realization that I get to be all the things. Like, so she has a real estate business and she's also a very well established singer and she's an amazing visual artist. And she's like, I always thought I was only allowed to be one thing. And so I thought that if I was going to become a real estate agent, then I couldn't teach singing anymore and I couldn't direct shows anymore. And like, I thought when I was younger that if I was going to study acting, and I couldn't be a singer because then I wouldn't be a serious actor if I was also an actor who could sing. And she's like, I don't know who told me that I could only be this one thing, but damn it, now I want to be a real estate agent who sings and a singer who sells real estate, right? Like, and it was such an eye-opening conversation, I think, for both of us, right? Because she's like, who the hell told me that this was how it had to be, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think about? I think that's what you're kind of getting at here is that we limit ourselves.
We do limit ourselves. And I think society limits us by telling us there are these boxes and there are the trailblazers who become the singing realtors or the trailblazers who become the trauma therapists or the trailblazers who become the folks that kind of really integrate their whole lives together to be who they are. And I think that integration takes place the rest of our lives.
Yeah. As we become.
You know, when you talk about those roles, it's just as a fan of professional basketball, I think about how players today are so different from a generation ago because they don't want to be defined as a point guard, a shooting guard, a power forward, a small forward, a center. They don't want to be that. They want to be able to shoot 3-pointers from, even if they're 7 feet tall, but it's just amazing.
I watched that 3-point contest. I watched that All-Star 3-point contest.
Yeah, wasn't that brilliant?
There was a couple of big guys that were just knocked down.
Yep. Yeah. To me, that says so much about where we are as humans that don't try to define me because of assignments that are not relevant. Never were really true, but now we've escaped them.
Right.
So I'm reading and listening to an amazing book. This is I'm gonna bring this back around. I promise you.
Sure. Can I say one more thing real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to say one more thing that I just want to poke at us a little bit in this conversation because I think this integration is so important and this need for us to continually become and not define and keep exploring and integrating who we are. And I still find it really helpful to know that my therapist is a therapist. I still find it really helpful to know that you guys are podcasters and writers. I still find it really helpful to know that when I go to class, my professor has a doctorate and is teaching me and is brilliant, right? So I think there's a lot of both and in here that I just don't want us to miss. Yeah.
That's a really important point. Our brains are neurobiologically programmed to categorize, right? We want to categorize. Yeah. I think what's happening right now, honestly, I think on the world, on the earth, spirit is expanding our categories. It's shifting our categories. It's helping us to understand that the categories that served us previously no longer served us, which is actually brings me to what I was about to say. So in this book called The Seat of the Soul by Gary Zukov, he talks about how marriage is of an old paradigm in that it served a socioeconomic need for safety. The new paradigm is a paradigm of soul growth. So we will enter into romantic and other relationships for the purpose of our soul's growth, right? And I thought that was really interesting. And that's not to say that marriages are no longer going to occur. Of course, they're going to occur, but that they'll have a different purpose, and it's a much more conscious purpose. Especially they happen when two people come together to understand that they are here to enlighten each other on their paths together, right? So when I think about that, and thinking about what you were just saying before, and I'm thinking about the ways that trans people and non-binary folks have moved to a more centered place in the public zeitgeist, right? That's not to say that they didn't always exist. Of course, they have always existed, right?
Yeah.
But now they are being centered in our public discourse in new ways. And I honestly believe that's a way of spirit helping us to shift and expand our categories, right? I really believe that what spirit is trying to do is help us to move into a new type of, expand our comfort level a little bit, to hold something that is not it's a this or a that, right? It's not a binary, but it's this beautiful, expansive becoming that holds so much potential. Can you talk about what you think about the potential of becoming a little bit?
Gosh, it's infinite.
I know.
I mean, the potential of becoming is infinite. The potential of, it's boundless. It is, for some reason, this makes me think back to when I asked a monk what silence was once. Because I see silence as a gestational place, as a foundational place, as a place of, just really, really navigating things. And this monk said to me, he said, silence is the tomb of Christ. It is the place of infinite possibility. And I love that because it's so true. I mean, anything could have happened there or couldn't have happened there, or we still don't know in many ways. And I think there's so much to be learned from each other coming, because I think that's kind of what you're getting at, right? Is like looking at each other's becoming. And, like when I go to the State House here in Indiana to oppose the next violent bill against trans folks, the courage I see in the people who are there, whether it's the parents of, whether it's trans folks, whether it's non-binary folks, whether it's gender expansive folks, the courage I see there is it's wordlessly inspiring. It is wordlessly challenging for my own life, to both honor who I am and fight for others to just be who they are. And I think in each other's becoming and recognizing the work we're all doing to become just who we are, I think a lot can be garnered from that. To just keep encouraging each other, keep expanding and keep stretching each other and, push our growing edges.
Yeah. When you mentioned what the monk said about the tomb of Christ, what I think is so interesting too is that in the ancient world and in ancient writings, caves, which is where he was buried, often represented the womb, right? And so I always refer to that as the womb of potential, right? That place of darkness, the feminine divine. So the fact that, I can go into the whole idea of Jesus going back into the womb and being reborn and etc. But that place where all things are possible. And energetically, we even have a chakra that does that, right? There's the ninth chakra, I think, is that place that brings us to that womb of potential. Okay. So shifting gears a little bit.
Okay.
Although not really, because you just mentioned going to activism and going and protesting. And one of the first conversations that you and I had, and I know you'll remember this, was down in North Carolina. Right?
Yeah.
On sitting on a front stoop of some building. I think it was a church. We were in a class. We were taking a class on organizing, and we were down there. And we had a conversation. We had to pair off about something. And we had a conversation in which we both recognized that we were kind of a binary, that Cassidy was far more landed in the contemplative side and wanted to increase her activism. And I was more in the activist side. And I needed to shut up and be quiet for a little bit and just, find that silence and that space. And I don't know. Do you have any thoughts coming back from that conversation?
Yeah. I think, gosh, you make me really want to quote someone. Therese Taylor Stinson is an author, and she wrote a beautiful book most recently about Harriet Tubman as a mystic. And she said this quote that I always yield to about contemplation and action. And I need to look it up because I don't want to misquote it. So Therese Taylor Stinson writes in her book about contemplation and justice. She writes, so that contemplation can be whole, it must consist of both inward solitude and reflection and an outward response to the situations in which we find ourselves present and awake. And she also says all contemplation should be followed by action. And so if we think about contemplation just as contemplation, and we don't attach it to basically its twin sibling or its divine counterpart action, then it's obsolete. It's meaningless. It does nothing. It will not do shit. I can cuss on here. Right. It is, it's empty. It's barren. But when we combine contemplation with action, our action, I find in my experience to be so much deeper, so much more rooted, so much more lasting, and so much more enduring. Both because contemplation can be a respite place, but more importantly, because I find contemplation to be a discernment place. So yeah, when we met Carrie, I was definitely more in the contemplative world, more detached from action. And that has absolutely shifted in my life. And I think, and I've seen both of us kind of balance out more in both of those worlds. And I think it just has made both of our action in the world all the more rich, all the more true, and enduring. And it's hard because a lot of the things that rise up in our world are urgent and they require urgency. And urgency is a very, very important and valid aspect of issues of justice and issues of inequality and issues of, harm, violence, right? People are literally dying. So I think balancing that urgency with enduring action and enduring change is such a necessary but complicated thing to figure out.
Well, wouldn't you say, Cassidy, that you could perhaps prescribe some kind of spiritual practice, whether it's meditative yoga, whether it's picking kumquats or whatever it may be, to center one's self who may be more susceptible to burnout as an activist? Would that be grounding for some people?
Yeah, I mean, first I would not ask me that question because I would ask an activist who has been in it and who has the endurance, and how did they get that endurance? I don't know. The one thing I would say for anyone that may be new to contemplation or new to this balance of contemplation and action, I would say I would really just encourage anyone to begin anywhere. And by that, I mean, when you pause to look out the window at your tree, be in that moment. Just push pause, be there as long as you can. Maybe it's just a minute today. Maybe it's 5 minutes tomorrow. I just think between the urgency of issues of justice in our world and the fact that we live on these devices that bombard us with information and news and videos scrolling across our screen every fucking hour and second of the day, looking at a tree can actually change our lives. And I actually deeply believe that.
Yes.
Yes. I know for me, I think moving into more a slower, more contemplative place has made me a much more thoughtful activist, right? And I think it's helped me to remove the performative. And I still don't think I've gotten that right, because I think some performative justice work is necessary, right? Like we learned in that organizing class that one of the things that good experienced organizers do is they will appear together as a performance, even if they have disagreements behind them, in the background. They will appear together in certain public forums in order to show a show of force, right? And I do think that there is a performative nature to certain justice work that is important and needs to happen, because people need to see. They need to see
Yes.
me saying something on Facebook, so that they can, number one, learn how to do it. Number two, see what happens and see how it's done, all of that kind of stuff. And also, contemplative practices have helped me to discern whether, am I doing that for something in my own ego? Am I doing that for something, or am I really doing it? Am I doing it thoughtfully? Am I considering everyone? Right? Like I'm remembering a time when I did it poorly, and regarding the Will Smith slap at the awards ceremony, right? And I just immediately went online and I was like, toxic masculinity, patriarchy, all of the things, which was a very white woman feminist thing, lens to view that. And I had to learn from Black and brown women who told me, no, we needed somebody to stick up for us. Like, we finally saw somebody who thought we were valuable enough to stick up for us. I still think that there's toxic masculinity involved in that. And also my perspective was expanded, and I learned about something that I wasn't considering and didn't have any experience in previously. And that was really important, right? So contemplation has helped me to be better about those things, I hope.
That's right. And what's as white women, what's our conversation to listen to be a part of, and what also is our conversation to pay attention to and say, okay, this is what I need to do for my work with other white folks in order for us to bring other people along on this journey. Because there's a lot of times that we can be so reactive and not responsive that we tend to lose the actual work we need to do as white people to bring other white folks along.
One of the things I remember a story. I was talking with somebody who's very important to me, who happens to be a federal agent, right? And he was a cop long before that. And he said to me at one point, he goes, Carrie, do you believe it's okay for, if a police officer is going into a call in Philadelphia, do you believe it's okay for that officer to just be beaten up or hit with things or shot just because he's standing there to help? He's coming into a police call. Do you believe that that's okay? And just the idea that because of my politics, which I am very vocal about, I was associated with someone who would be okay with that kind of complete lack of respect and human dignity and care. And this book uses, I can't remember the name of it, but the word, darn it, it's an R word that is really good, but it talks about, like, it's not respect, but it's reverence for human life, that I would be thought to be somebody who had no reverence for human life just because of that body was wearing a blue outfit, a police uniform. That disturbed me to no end, that this person who I care about, who knows me, would think that I would be okay with that kind of complete disregard for human life. And that's what I think some of the dialogue in the justice movements has created. And that kind of dialogue isn't going to get us anywhere.
Yeah.
Because no human being, whether they're in a police uniform or Black skin or, queer embodiment, is going to want to meet at a table with somebody that they believe is out to murder them and has no reverence for their humanity. Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge issue.
And again, like, back to this idea of knowing our role in the conversation, because we need people who are angry and fed up and pissed and pointing us to the urgency. We need people who are bringing other people along, willing to, like, slow the conversation enough to kind of like slowly trickle us all in one direction. I mean, we need everybody. We need everybody. We don't just need, the people. Like, I need to be reminded of the anger sometimes. Do I get angry about these issues? Absolutely. And I need to be reminded of that anger sometimes, because also I don't live it in such an urgent way as a fucking white woman, with my privilege and everything, right? It's not something that is always atop my mind. And I need to be reminded of that. And I need to be reminded of my role and my work to bring folks along to really shift things towards where they need to be.
You made me flash on when I was growing up and I was about 5 or 6 years old. My parents, had grown up in a Black world and Jim Crow South schools, everything. But we were living in San Francisco, and see, here I am as a 5 or 6 year old, and there was some kind of birthday party or something, and all of these families were over our house who lived on the Navy base with us, and we were the only Black folks there, and the boys were outside, and this little boy found a stick with a nail in it and hit me with it. And I mean, there's a space up here where my hair doesn't grow still. But he hit me with it. And so immediately I'm covered in blood. And I remember running in the house and then other kids running with me. I remember running in bloodied and watching my mom navigate that situation. In that moment, I needed my mom to be the angry Black woman, but she wasn't. She wasn't. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I began to appreciate her situation, trying to navigate that as the only Black woman in the room. And it's still unresolved really inside of me. It's, from we're going back to basically just out of toddlerhood. And I still haven't resolved that because I can respect and appreciate my mom's position, but it was never communicated with me what was going on, how mild she was with everyone. Yeah, so, anger is sometimes a luxury. I mean, the expression of anger can be a luxury.
Which maybe means that as white women, Cass, you and I are responsible for expressing the anger because it's safer for us to express anger than other times. But I also always dance with that because it's like, I don't need to be anybody else's voice. I don't want to steal somebody's voice, right? If it's safer for me to be the angry voice, but am I then usurping somebody's ability to use their own voice who needs to be heard? Maybe I need to uplift their voice, right? So it's really complicated to navigate those and to know when to step into which role, right? In order to do the most good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I still go back to a time, and we're almost out of time, Cass, but I still go back to the time where David here stepped in for me, and I still appreciate it. And I don't think he even remembers it, but we were on Facebook, and I can't remember. I think I was explaining some kind of experience that I had as a woman, and another man came on and said, "Oh, don't take it seriously. Just don't, blah blah blah." Like really downplaying my own experience. And David came on and said something. Yes, he was mansplaining about how to not worry about my own experience that had bothered me. And David came on and he just very gently said something along the lines of, I usually make it a habit to listen to women when they talk, when they share their experiences rather than to tell them like how they should feel about it or something. And I just was like, thank you so much, David. And I mean, that's the kind of, like if chivalry, that's the kind of chivalry I need, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is a really wonderful model of the ways that we can use, because he can speak to a man in a way that I can't, right? And I can speak to a white person in perhaps a way that David can't. Although I think people love to listen to David, no matter who they are. So.
Yeah, except for if they, it proportionalizes, I think, sometimes with the degree of power that a person has, because the more power they wield, if they wield it in abusively, then they'd hate to hear from me. And I'm, dealing with that right now with elected officials locally and beyond who are just, the thing is, the other side of that coin is I made a presentation. I actually sent it to Carrie. I made a presentation to our community, and I sent the YouTube video to local imam. And he asked that we could get together and have coffee. He was effusive in his gratitude. He sent it to his department head here at UC Santa Barbara. He sent it to people in his congregation because he was so heartened by the fact, not just because of me, but because we always have a conversation at the end of my presentations. So there were several other people who engaged, this compassion for local Palestinians and local Muslims who are basically being ignored by those in power. And so when I talk to those in power, they're like, oh, here's David again. But when I talk to the people who are being abused by that power, they're like, here's David again,
I think that means you're doing a whole lot right.
Yeah.
So Cassidy, as we finish up, and I'm only rushing this because I have to go pick up my son. But I would love to hear you talk a little bit about who you would love this to be reading your book. Like, who is your book for? Queering Contemplation, and we'll link it in the notes and stuff. But who is your book for, and what do you hope people will derive from your book?
Yeah, so my biggest fear is that the title is going to sway folks away from it, and that they're going to think they have to be queer to read it. And I think I want to be very clear that my book is for everyone. My book is for everyone who has any consideration of or experience with contemplative life, beginners, novices, advanced folks in contemplative life, whatever that means or looks like, because no one's ever advanced in contemplative life. That's bullshit.
Right.
And my book is an invitation to looking at contemplative life differently. And that's what I mean by queer generally in the book is, let's look at contemplative life differently. Let's consider it differently. Let's wonder about the ways that it can be used as a form of feeding action in our lives. And yeah, it's for whoever the fuck wants to read it.
I love that. We had a conversation back in when we were together in Arizona. And you made a comment. We had a conversation about how that the way you think about queerness is actually an invitation to all of us to embrace that we are all queer, that there is some unique perspective or unique lens through which we see the world that renders us all queer. And can you speak a little bit more about that? Because I just thought that was so freeing. I felt so free in that moment when we had that conversation.
Yeah. I definitely use queer as a word of expanse and invitation. And I do want to say first, before I say anything else, is that the way I talk about the word queer is not the way every queer person views the word queer. It's not the way every queer person views contemplation. This is one queer person's experience of the word, and
you're not a monolith.
No, right. One queer person's use of the word. And, queer theory suggests that queering something is a way to look at it, examine it, explore it, aside from norms. And so those norms could be patriarchy. Those norms could be heteronormativity. Those norms could be any kind of norms that keep us stagnant or any kind of norms that hinder us from our own becoming or our own exploring. And so when I say queering contemplation, I'm saying, let's queer the way that we look at contemplation. And so, the word queer, we can queer all kinds of things in our lives. We can queer the way we look at ourselves or our job or our relationship, even if it's heteronormative. I mean, there's many ways to queer things. And I think there's many ways to shake up the way we look at things, because we can't do things differently until we shake it up. And right when we talk about activism calls forth prophetic folks to shake things up, to show us how it can be different, to show us how it can be better. And so, there are a lot of really brilliant activists who also happen to be queer in terms of sexuality. And I think in many ways, all activists are queering the norm for us so that we can see things better, so that we can see things as beyond the status quo, beyond the norm, beyond everything that is hindering us. And I recognize
that begs a question for me, because you emerged from the North American heartland, as we call it. It almost seems like to exist and not conform is like queering reality or queering the world, from that kind of root. Am I accurate in that perception?
To exist and not conform?
Yes. To own yourself.
Yeah. I think there's something to that. I think that, I don't know where I want to go with that. Yeah, I'm thinking about that still.
To own yourself, I think that's a beautiful thing, and to own your own becoming, right? And to not conform.
I think one of my thoughts is that shouldn't be a revolutionary concept.
Right.
Like that shouldn't be like queer, but because of how fucked up our world is, in many ways it seems that way.
If it's any encouragement, Cassidy, when I heard the title of your book, I'm a cis hetero guy, and I was drawn to it. I just thought, wow, this is going to speak to me. So,
good.
Good. Yeah.
Nice. Glad to hear that.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So where can people find your work, my dear friend?
Yes, you can find me at CassidyHall.com, CassidyHall.com. I'm on Instagram as Cass Hall, and I don't really use X anymore, Twitter, X.
Me neither.
Bullshit.
What even is that? I don't know.
Thank you. Yeah. And then my book is available for pre-order on Bookshop, on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, and on Broadleaf, which is my publisher.
Wonderful. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, my beloved friend. I adore you. Both. And we will let you know when this is dropping.
Great. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye now.
Thank you so much for being here today. We are people who have left behind performance-based religion and the shame that comes with it. Maybe you have a personal liberation story to tell, and we want to know about it. Please contact us on Twitter at GodIsNotAnAsshole or text 805-703-8393, because the world needs to know that God is not an asshole.